Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Yale Sleep Medicine Grand Rounds. My name is Ritika Thapa. I'm one of the pulmonary critical care and sleep medicine faculties here at Yale. Just some brief announcements before I introduce our today's speaker. Please ensure that you're muted. In order to receive the CME credit for attendance, please see the chat room for instructions. You need to sign up for this credit though, and if you've not signed up already, please send a message to Debbie Lovejoy. And if you think anyone else is interested, please reach out to her as well. And if you have any questions or comments during the presentation, please use the chat room, or you can also unmute yourself at the end of the talk and ask the questions on your own, and I will also moderate the session for you. Recorded versions of these lectures will be available on YouTube a few weeks after the presentations. I have today the extreme pleasure of introducing Dr. Ashley Hagaman. Dr. Hagaman received her MPH degree from Rollins School of Public Health at Emory University, Georgia, and then her PhD in Global Health from Arizona State University. She is currently an assistant professor of public health in the Department of Social and Behavioral Sciences at Yale School of Public Health, and also holds a secondary appointment in the Department of Anthropology. She's also the director of Qualitative Methods Innovative Program at Center for Methods in Implementation and Prevention Science at Yale School of Public Health. Her research examines a complex collection of factors that influence depression and suicide in varying cultural contexts, particularly among vulnerable population. She collaborates with several interdisciplinary teams around the world to develop and test innovative strategies to alleviate depression and enhance maternal health systems with field sites in Nepal, Pakistan, and Ethiopia. And she still travels all over to do her research on a regular basis. She also contributes to the development of innovative, qualitative, and mixed methods to improve the study and implementation of evidence-based health practices, incorporating and testing new passive data collection strategies and rapid analytic techniques. She's lectured in courses in mental disorders and maternal health nationally and internationally, has received multiple awards, is the recipient of several grants, including from NIH, and has authored over 50 publications. Thank you so much for being with us, Dr. Hagaman. And without further delay, I would like to hand it over to you to share your expertise on maternal sleep, distress, and family function, a qualitative investigation among mothers in rural Nepal. And I should also mention that I also had the opportunity to involve in the early phase of this research. And here you go, Dr. Hagaman. Oh, I think you're muted. Debbie, can you unmute Ashley? Sorry.
Oh, that's okay.
Okay, there you go.
Oh, there we are. Okay, hi. Hi, everyone. I had no power there. So today I'll just share my screen with you. Thank you so much for that introduction, and I'm so happy to know Dr. Thapa. We got connected because I was interested in learning more about sleep medicine for some of the maternal depression interventions we do, and then happened to learn that there's an incredible Nepali sleep medicine physician here at Yale, and so naturally it made a lot of sense for me to get connected with her. But I'm not a sleep expert, but we've done several studies. I am a maternal depression expert, and we run a lot of clinical trials to address depression and suicide in South Asia and other places around the world. So I'll talk a little bit about that. These are, I think, my disclosures, that I have no relevant disclosures, and I'm told to tell you to check the chat for your continuing medical education credit. I'm gonna, in my slides, so I'm actually a trained medical anthropologist that leads clinical trials, but I'm gonna have a lot of pictures, and every time I show you a picture, I just want you to know that the people in that picture agreed to have it displayed. And so please don't fret there. They are happy to kind of help you understand the work that we're doing. Because this is such a different space, I thought I wanted to introduce myself a little bit to other folks around, because I imagine anthropology might not be something that kind of like comes at the intersection a lot, but I also do a lot of mixed methods work, and that means really kind of thinking about my own positionality to my work in my academics and the field sites that I have around the world. So I've been at Yale School of Public Health since 2019. I'm a qualitative methodologist, so that means I put a lot of intellectual thought into thinking about how do we integrate qualitative methods into our clinical trial designs. I'm an implementation scientist, and so I specifically think about how our qualitative work can inform our implementation measurements and outcomes. And then as an anthropologist, we also use a lot of qualitative methods to develop ways of measuring things that have no salient ways of measuring them in a particular culture or context. And I'll give you actually a really concrete example of that with one of the tools that we developed to measure sleep in Nepal. And some other failed ways. Actually, I'm going to talk a lot about failed ways that we tried to measure sleep and couldn't. And so a lot of my work just focuses on mental health service implementation. And I lead a bunch of clinical trials around the world. I teach the qualitative methods class, one of the only qualitative methods classes that's offered at Yale. I would be happy to have you join it or have your trainees join it. And I'm also really proud that a lot of the work that I do focuses on moms and mental health around the world, and a lot of my research teams are teams of mothers themselves in Pakistan and Nepal. And it's a part that just brings me a lot of pride to create career pathways for them. So these are some of the pictures of the amazing women that I get to work with and around the world. And then I'm also a mom myself. And just to give you a sense of where I do have expertise, because sleep is not that, is that I'm the principal investigator of 5 federally funded clinical trials to prevent suicide in various contexts. So 2 in Nepal, 1 in Pakistan, 3 in Nepal, 1 in Pakistan, and 1 in the USA. So we actually do a lot of suicide prevention implementation work in hospitals and communities with youth, with mothers in Pakistan, delivered by peers. And then I have a new project with the Connecticut Army National Guard to improve their suicide prevention programming here in the state. And that's my first ever domestic project in my life. And so, but today, I'm not talking about suicide. I'm going to talk about, although sleep and suicide is related, and at some point, if anyone's interested, please let me know, because I would love to talk with you. But I'm going to talk to you about postpartum depression and kind of how and why we started exploring sleep, given the context within which we explore this. So in the US, 1 in 8 moms report some kind of symptom of postpartum depression. Globally, it's more like 1 in 3 or 1 in 4. And so it can actually be quite high in some other contexts, depending on how you're measuring it. And so it's pretty variable, and there's not a lot of good measurement. In Nepal in particular, we're worried about women because there were reports, a decade or so ago that the leading cause of death among women of reproductive age was suicide. And it actually wasn't childbirth or some of these other infectious diseases that we would expect. And so there are particular reasons to be really concerned about mental health, and particularly maternal mental health in some regions of the world, and that the clinical profile, the risk profile for something like depression and suicide is actually quite different compared to the West and higher income settings. So I'm not a sleep epidemiologist, but there is some interesting emerging global work around sleep health in low and middle income settings. And so when I say low and middle income countries, there's classifications of kind of income levels. And so typically so we use this term LMIC, and so I'm going to use that for a long time now. So I hope that you know what I'm talking about. And so, like, for example, Nepal is considered a low-income country. Pakistan just moved from a low-income country to a lower middle-income country, but in any case, so what has generally been found around sleep health is that in non-Western societies, sleep is broadly more flexible, meaning it happens at different points in the day. It's not quite as consolidated, and it's more social vis-a-vis the West. And I'll talk to you a little bit more about what that means. But it's more of a social activity than an independent activity. And often that's because of bed sharing and sleep spaces. And so oftentimes there's shared sleep in a confined space. And there's been some findings that at least in the systematic review and a couple other studies, that parents that have a breastfeeding aged infant actually sleep longer with higher quality sleep in low income settings, right? And so often that's sort of like against this sort of Western backdrop of what it means to be a new parent and sleep poorly, right? And so there's actually evidence that it's like the opposite. And then a third of all adults in ELMIC reported poor quality sleep. Again, those measurements are underdeveloped, and there's a dearth really of high quality sleep research in low and middle income settings. And so there's just a lot that we don't know. In any case, as an anthropologist, there are also a lot of anthropologists that think a lot about maternity and mother-child attachments and child development and bioanthropology of sleep. And so just to give you, again, I'm not a sleep anthropologist, but there certainly are. There's a lot of expertise at Notre Dame, for example, with the McKenna lab, and also at Duke with some other bioanthropological labs. But basically the anthropological stance, sort of vis-a-vis sort of the Western biomedical stance on and like probably American Pediatric Association stances on sleep, is that there's a lot of so the parent-infant sleep proximity, right, co-sleeping, combined with lactation are really illuminating a complex set of adaptations that's the human evolutionary norm, right? So this idea of co-sleeping is sort of evolutionarily normal, and that a part of that evolutionary perspective establishes really important hormonal and behavioral ecologies that keep humans healthy. And so there's been a lot of work that maternal infant sleep contact actually provides a really empirically different sleep experience, where then compared to solitary sleep. So biological anthropologists that focus on sleep really focus on co-sleeping and kind of what that does to human and infant biology. And then there's also cultural anthropologists who think about the embodied experiences of sleep. And this is also right beyond some of these physiological pathways that we know are related to sleep and mental health. Co-sleeping is also really importantly a social experience. And so it's a form of care, it's a form of moral development, and it's a form of safety. And so again, sort of there's a few different pictures about what sleep should or can or is guided to look like in sort of the maternal setting. And then the last thing I'll say, probably from an anthropological perspective, is that we make a lot of meanings out of sleep, right? We can make individual and interpersonal and social and economic meanings, right? And so, for example, I asked my 4-year-old, what do you think about sleep? Like, what's sleep like for you? And he said, I like sleep because I get to think about driving any construction vehicle I can imagine. And so in that moment, he's actually thinking about sleep as exciting, as fulfilling, as sort of motivating, right, for his future. And then another time he told me that like when he slept through the whole night in his own bed, he was very proud of it, right? And so that was a moment of self-empowerment, or that was a moment of making me proud, right? So it's another kind of social exchange. And so even 4-year-olds are putting a lot of social meaning, right, within their sleep. And so that's, you know, a part of why it's interesting to study cross-culturally. The last thing I'll say is in the maternal and like motherhood frame, right? When we think about perinatal health and perinatal mental health and perinatal sleep, sleep is also very much its own economy, right? And so in the West, there's like economic ventures about how mothers can optimize sleep for themselves and their infants. And so isn't it interesting, right? And so what kind of comparative work can be done in this space? And so a little bit of that motivated some of the work that I do, at least in the maternal depression treatments that we have. But more so, it was just trying to understand what's the sleep experience like for moms in Nepal because they really didn't have much of an idea. But we did know, and I'll get to this a little later, that in our interventions, when moms come to therapy, they bring, or like really many people, sort of sleep becomes this really key marker and feature. It's both a symptom, right, of their depression or of their mental health or their mental state. Okay, so what do we know about sleep and depression? Sleep quality is a really salient symptom and key intervention point for treating depression, right? So oftentimes in therapeutic encounters, right, one of the things that's a foci is actually like improving sleep to improve someone's mental health. Um, we also know that poor sleep quality is associated with both antenatal and postnatal depression. So if there's poor sleep quality in pregnancy, there's much higher likelihood that that woman would then have clinically relevant depression in the postpartum period. Um, uh, Similarly, like there's a dearth of sort of sleep epidemiology in these settings. There's certainly a dearth of the socio and economic context of sleep and its relationship with depression. And then there's been a few studies that also explore the relationship between insomnia and perceived maternal attachment. And so among women that cannot sleep as well, they actually perceive that their relationships or their attachment to their child is much lower. And so again, like these are all sort of pointing to really important opportunities for why sleep matters in the context of mental health and why sleep matters in the context of early child development and child health. Okay, so I've worked in Nepal for over 10 years. But again, like sleep has not been a focus, but I can give you like a very brief overview of the postnatal period in Nepal, which is often when we in our trials and our interventions are intervening on maternal depression. And so first, there are a few religious ceremonies, at least in the Hindu context, of postpartum purification. So that means in the postpartum period, there's anywhere from a few days to 10 days to more days where that's sort of this unpure state that the mother is in, and she's separated from the rest of the household with her infant. And then there's a sort of purification ceremony after that, and then the mother is sort of like re-entered into the family social network. And so there's also often a postpartum return to her maiti or her maternal home. So Nepal is a patrilocal society, meaning women move into the husband's household when they get married. And so they leave their mom's home and go into their husband's home. And so, but after at the postpartum period, after this purification ceremony, they can often return to their maiti for a good chunk of time. And actually, the same thing happens in Pakistan. It's called chilla, where the mother will return to her maternal home. A lot of that is because there's so much comfort and so much care and a lot of special support and attention that's given to the mom in that context, because often being in the in-laws household is sort of ridden with a lot of other expectations and responsibilities. And then additionally, there's several sort of postpartum nutrition and care practices that are employed. And so she, wouldn't eat many spicy foods, or she wouldn't eat cold foods or raw foods. And there's actually like an economy actually of oil massaging, especially in the urban centers where there's, and this will come up later when I talk about some of our human-centered design work, but there's like a workforce of Talaune Didis, which are women that are sort of hired to go give an infant and the mom massages after they're born. And so this oil massage is really important. Yeah, and then so there is some interesting multiple care seeking practices, especially if there's infant interrupted sleep. So distraught sleep among an infant would often prompt women to go to a traditional healer in order to address whatever ailment has befallen them. And actually, a lot of the women that you'll see in our qualitative study did this for their infants that weren't sleeping well, and then reported that things got better after they did that. And so again, like infant sleep is a marker of health, maternal sleep not so clear, and that's a part of what we were really exploring. So I'm going to tell you a little bit first about some of this really exploratory qualitative research that we did to just understand maternal sleep experiences. I have a few collaborators here that I'm very grateful for. So the first is Vanya Shibal-Shankar, who was an undergraduate at Yale. She's now a medical student at University of Miami. But she was funded to go do this under another umbrella study that I had ongoing addressing maternal depression in Nepal, and went and talked to a bunch of women to really understand their sleep context and sleep experience. And so our collaborator in Nepal was Priyanka Timsina, who helped a lot and supported that. And a part of what I had wanted to do, and I will show you that when I talk about our sensing intervention to improve maternal depression treatment, was to integrate sleep. And so that's when I got connected to Dr. Thapa and Dr. Yagi to see if there were more ways that we can incorporate sleep into some of the sensing work that we were already doing to enhance maternal depression treatment. And so we brought them in to make sure that we could culturally adapt some instruments to measure sleep quality, and then also optimize our opportunities for kind of how to rigorously measure sleep rather beyond sort of self-report. So a part of the purpose of this was to figure out, like among moms, what is sort of possible and feasible in the technological space about how we can measure and understand sleep. Okay, so I put a bunch in here because I wasn't sure how much qualitative work comes to these grand rounds. And so I wanted to give you a good sense of what that means and what we do. And I'm totally happy to support anyone who's interested in doing some of this stuff. But so we were working in Dhulikhel, Nepal, which is about an hour or so east of the capital of Nepal. So it's para-rural. There's sort of like an urban part, and then there's more rural outskirts. Most of it is quite rural. Meaning you would have to walk like an hour to get to a health post or something like that. And so I'm also going to show you a bunch of pictures in here. Every time we did an interview, we took a picture of the mother's sleep environment with permission. And so when you see the pictures, you can see the bed here is in the far right. It's covered with like a sheer net, but it's also just right next to the kitchen. So this family lives in a single room with their two children, the husband and the wife. And so that's their bed on the bottom part there. And then the top part, the husband would sleep up there, if that makes sense. And then the rest of the family would sleep with the mom in the bottom bunk. So anyway, so we were interested in talking to both mothers that had postpartum depression and mothers that did not have postpartum depression, just to make sure we were getting variation and kind of how women were talking about and thinking about and experiencing sleep. So there's a Nepali validated tool, the PHQ-9, that we use to measure that. We used a cut point in order to find women that we recruited out of the community to see if they were depressed or not depressed, and then approach them to see if they would do an interview with us. And so we did 15 semi-structured interviews with mothers within a year. It actually ended up being within 10 months of their child being born. They were between 45 and 90 minutes. Those interviews elicited postpartum, birth and postpartum experiences, their sleep patterns, preferences, what values they had, social aspects of sleep, and then their perceptions of sleep and any impacts on their own health or their infant's health and development. And we also use these qualitative interviews to rigorously culturally adapt instruments to measure self-reported quality of sleep. So that was the Pittsburgh Sleep Quality Index. And so we used Van Omerman's approach to do that. To analyze the qualitative data, we use something called constructivist grounded theory. I wanted to tell you what that was because I thought maybe you would want to know. So it's a type of qualitative analysis that attends to the historical, social, and situational context within which someone exists. And so it draws from a relativist epistemology. This might be different from more positivist epistemologies that you're used to seeing in research presentations, probably. And so what that means is we really acknowledge both your and your research participants' roles, realities, and standpoints, and positionalities and powers. And so we incorporate reflexivity, which is really thinking about our own backgrounds, values, and actions in the context of how women are also describing their own values and actions. And so that's what that means. Happy to chat more. So these are the moms that we interviewed. Oh, it's 16. Sorry, it wasn't 15, it's 16 moms. And I wanted to show you, rather than just like an aggregate of everything, although you can see the aggregate at the bottom, kind of what they are like, right? In qualitative work, we're not looking for statistical inference. We're looking for texture and nuance and sort of understanding someone's experiences and how they perceive and describe them. And so most of the moms were between 18 and 39. Their kids were around 5 months old. About half, a little more than half, were depressed. And most of them were no longer in the workforce. I can tell you all of them were in some form of formal or informal work before they had a child. And then about 75% of them are no longer doing any of that formal or informal work. And I believe the only ones that are continuing informal work were the ones with graduate degrees. And then we asked them, and you can see that sometimes this is really, really hard. And this is a part of the cultural adaptation process. If like people, not everyone pays attention to what time it is all the time. And they might not even like have a watch that tells them the time all the time. And so asking what time do you wake up? What time do you go to bed? How many hours of sleep do you get at night was actually like, it took like a really long time to elicit that information. And you know, we've sort of been thinking about other ways that we could do that meaningfully. But in any case, most people were sleeping around 7 hours, which actually there's like some interesting studies from like rural Haiti and other rural areas where they sleep much longer, like 10 or 11 hours. I can tell you in some of the rural Western places that I work, it's like really varies depending on the time of year. If it's harvest season, if they have to wake up early, or if it's dark a lot, they're going to sleep a lot longer. And so anyway, like just to tell you, all of this is very, really variable. You know, most women napped at some point during the day. So they would sort of have like sleep at night, but then they would also nap. So almost 70% of them. And about 70% had a primary education or less. Yeah, so this is who we talked to. These are the women. And I just to tell you a little bit about what we found. So we found that, well, I'm gonna run through it because I'm talking for a long time. So when women talked about their sleep patterns, all of them co-slept. Many of them co-slept not just with their infant, but with their other older kids as well, if they had multiple kids. Usually their husband would sleep somewhere else if there was another place available, or they would sleep on the floor. All the mothers breastfed. They woke up many times during the night to breastfeed, but they noted that it wasn't disruptive. So they would wake up to breastfeed, but they would kind of go back to sleep while that was happening. So breastfeeding wasn't a disruption. The disruptions that they note that wear on them in terms of their own sleep quality were things like being sick, getting really hungry. So it was sort of this, it's sort of a really hard thing to, in a rural area, to have a bunch of snacks lying around or something like that. And so there was actually like a lot of pain involved in like early breastfeeding days when they would wake up like in pain because they were so hungry, right? But there wouldn't be a lot around for them to do about it. They would often, in many households, in the middle of the night is when the government turns on the water and the water comes to your home, and then you have to pump it to your tank on top of your house. And so they have to wake up to go do that because that's their job. And so they sort of, so that was another sleep interruption where they have to do that. And then insects were other sleep interruptions. Most moms talked about all the mosquitoes, that they would kind of hear them buzzing in their ears. And then the other biggest thing was changing wet clothes. And so again, in a place where like disposable diapers aren't a thing, but there's like a lot of fear around coldness with sickness, that there's so much work and elaborate work involved in sort of keeping a baby clean and dry. So those were the things that they reported, sort of interrupting their sleep. You know, most women said that they did not get enough sleep, right? So very few, I think only a couple said that they liked the amount of sleep that they got. but many napped, but napping had a lot of social implications, right? So there's sort of this like social context around if you can or cannot nap, and I'll get to that in a minute. And then I just have some quotes here about kind of how moms describe that. And so like asking about breastfeeding, she says, I think it's good if my baby wakes up a ton to breastfeed. It means that she's hungry and that she can eat. And so again, some of these things that sort of come up in Western culture or Western context is disruptive or not necessarily disruptive among these women. Mothers also describe their sleep quality directly associated with a few emotional problems. The first is manma kelne, which means words playing in my heart mind, which really means like anxiety. And so if they didn't sleep a lot, they would have a lot of worry, or worry was causing them to not sleep a lot, right? And so this like sort of association with worry was super, super salient. They also said that if they don't sleep, they would get really angry. And this was pretty much true across both the depressed and non-depressed mothers. I would say the main difference was that the non-depressed mothers, and that's what I have in this quote here, is that they could kind of rationalize and cognitively reframe their distress, whereas the depressed moms would sort of, a lot of this stress and anger would sort of bleed into their interpersonal relationships and spiral. And so again, I think it's also just really important to think about sort of the social context in sleep. Is like women told us a lot that like people are telling me what to do all day long, right? As a new mother, they are told what to do constantly every moment of the day. And so that's what she's talking about here, is like someone is always telling me what to do, and I like can't stop thinking about it when I go to sleep at night. And so again, sort of them bringing these interpersonal experiences with them into their sleep. And then, sleep compromise was typically talked about as like fulfilling a maternal self-worth or fulfilling maternal productivity, right? Sleep compromise wasn't often talked about as like hindering her own health, if that makes sense. And so for example, this woman here is talking about, I have to cook and serve everyone dinner. I leave I let my husband sleep. Like I'm the one who gets the water. I change the baby's clothes. I do everything at nighttime, and I tell him to go back to sleep, that I can do it. A part of what she's explaining there is that like her being a good mom is being able to do all of these things, right? And like sleep compromise is a part of that sacrifice, but that actually is like sort of empowering to her. And then lastly, before I get on to some kind of like some of the applications of this, is that husbands and in-laws, so remember I told you that mothers are often sleeping in the husband's household with like a multi-generational household. So they're often like his parents are there, or his brother-in-laws or sister-in-laws are also there. And so these people in the home, right, there's a lot of shared sleeping spaces, would enforce sleep loss or enforce sleep quality. So people in the household are making decisions about when a woman can and cannot sleep. And a lot of that was implicated in what she has to do before she goes to bed and what time she has to wake up, and if she can nap. And so here, this quote on the left, what would they say? What would my in-laws say if I didn't get up early? What would they do if I didn't make them breakfast? I have to wake up to make sure I can cook. So women talked about like having to be up at a certain time in order to have breakfast ready for everyone. But then some other women talked about how their family really helped them sleep and prioritize sleep because their family sort of viewed it as like a way for her to be a better mother. And so there were also different moments of that. And again, you can see like the depressed mother is living in this kind of harsh environment, and the non-depressed mom is saying, well, when my husband's back from Dubai, that he'll do the laundry, he'll do the dishes, he'll do all these things, he'll let me nap so I can sleep. Right? But there's this letting me nap kind of context. So in some of these qualitative interviews, we also adapted the PSQI. And there's sort of a process, a cultural adaptation process to do that. We like did a bunch of free lists of idioms and problems, right, that people sort of think about if they don't get enough sleep. So there's some items in this PSQI that's like, how often, do you have trouble driving or something, right? That like would not be culturally relevant to rural Nepal. And so like we have to change those items. And so this is a part of the way that we do that. And then we do cognitive interviews in the qualitative interviews to make sure that all of the questions kind of make sense, that the response sets make sense. And we revise the tool, and then we use the tool in the next study that I'm going to talk to you about. So this is just kind of summarizing everything I just said. So what we wanted to do with all of that information was to figure out, how do we use sleep when we're trying to better improve the maternal depression interventions that we have. And so a lot of the work that I do is like my sort of portfolio of research is figuring out, how do we improve the quality of psychosocial interventions that are available to people in low income settings? And how do we improve their implementation, right? In contexts where there's not a lot of specialty care. And so this is an R21, R33 that's funded by the NIMH. That's collecting biosensing technology. I'm going to tell you what that means, to personalize a packaged, like a sort of manualized depression therapy that's offered to rural women in Nepal. Okay, I feel like I already talked about the background. These are the amazing people that I work with. I am just so grateful for all of them. And so Brandon Court and Alistair Van Heerden are the PIs on this study. I was sort of in charge of a lot of the human-centered design and qualitative aspects. And so the project was to use human-centered design to develop a culturally acceptable way to use passive biosensing, meaning how do we put sensors on a mom and her baby in order to get information about them? Where are they walking? Where are they going? How much sunlight do they have? How much talking is there? What's their heart rate? And then hopefully how are they sleeping, right? So we would hope to get some sensing measurements around sleep. So how do we do that in a rural context? And then how do we feed it to a counselor in a way that makes sense, that helps the counselor improve the depression treatment that she's giving? I'm going to show you parts of the first part of this grant, which is the human-centered design component. And so the first part of this was to use human-centered design and usability testing to figure out, how do we do passive sensing data collection, and how do we get counselors to use it in their therapeutic delivery. And then the second was actually testing it out, right? So we have an idea, we have a platform, we have an application, we have a way of doing it and a way of getting community buy-in or mother buy-in or husband buy-in. And then let's actually try and do it and see if the sensing technology can work in rural Nepal. So this is where we worked, also in Dhulikhel, which is the same place that I was we were talking about earlier. And those are a lot of the field sites that we recruited out of, where the stars are. The maternal depression packaged intervention that we used is something called Problem Management Plus. So it's a very structured, manualized intervention of 5 sessions that are an hour and a half. They're weekly. There's a focus on every session. And so counselors are trained in this sort of manualized therapy, can be used across a range of mental disorders, or common mental disorders. Mostly mood disorders. And it's been really effective, actually, at treating depression and treating anxiety in low-income settings. And so I just wanted to give you a little information about that. This is Pushpanjali. She's one of our counselors who also incorporated the passive sensing technology. Okay, so when I say passive sensing, what do I mean? So what we did was we gave mom a phone at first, and then we gave her a watch, because the phones were like not with her, they were somewhere else, or she left it somewhere. And so that phone has a bunch of sensing equipment on it and detectors on it. It can sense light. It can sense her actigraphy. It records 15 seconds of audio every minute. So we can know what her auditory environment is like. Is the baby crying? Are people singing? Are people yelling? And we have a way of coding all of that. And then we also get her GPS location. So is she always at home? Is she moving around? How far is her radius? That kind of thing. A lot of the reason that we're doing this is because behavioral activation is often a focus of maternal depression treatment, and also of the problem management, right? So moms would say, oh, well, I'll give you examples in a second. So we collect all this information and we feed it to the counselor. And the counselor gets this information in order to personalize the therapeutic treatment that she's giving the mom. And the mom also gets that information in her therapy sessions if she's making goals around certain behaviors. So if she has sleep goals, she would get sleep information. If she has activity goals, she would get activity information. If she has goals around, hey, you're with your infant 24/7, let's figure out a way to get someone to help you. Right? So we can look at proximity as a way of measuring, like, how effective are you in doing that. And so we did all of that using an app that we called Stand Strong for the counselor to use, right, in her therapeutic delivery. And so we've had a bunch of publications on this from the preliminary work. We use, well, not we, I mean, many other members of the team are sort of coming up with really amazing machine learning methods to analyze a lot of this data in order to spit it back out to the counselor. And there's a lot of ways that we take a lot of good care of that data. And so in the human-centered design, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about what we did and why sleep sensing didn't work. Spoiler. And so in order to introduce this kind of technology, smartphones, smartwatches, there's like a lot of important community-driven, community-based work that has to be done because of all the implications, right? And all the uncertainties and the newness. And so we used human-centered design through a bunch of focus groups and other sort of methods in order to design, right, the approach and what the app itself and therapeutic integration would look like. And so we talked to a bunch of different people that were really closely involved in working with mothers or mothers themselves, right? So some of these would be psychosocial counselors, the oil massage sisters that I told you about before. We had a focus group of oil massage sisters because they go and massage every woman in the community and they know a lot about what life is like for them. We talked to nurses, we talked to mother-in-laws, we talked to husbands. There's actually another student who did a whole study on, like, how do we integrate husbands and, like, what kind of family sort of integration do we need in order to make this kind of thing work. And the female community health volunteers who are pictured here, who are sort of like the backbone of Nepal's health system and responsible for improving a lot of outcomes. One of the main things we did was create a consent video. So instead of reading an informed consent form to someone or only doing that, we made a video that was explaining the project and demonstrating the project to any mother and her family. And anyone else that she wanted us to show the video to, but definitely like the people she lived with and herself. And so instead of just getting something written about or explained about, they sort of got to watch a video about what the project was and all of this sensing technology that we were trying to do. We made a whole bunch of adaptations to our sensing, like, implementation and platform through the human-centered design. And then we did a proof of concept testing among the moms, right? And so we enrolled 24 moms with depression over 8 weeks. We had to screen almost 1,000 women to get those 24 moms, just to give you a sense of, like, kind of how much work goes into this. And we treated them for their depression. I wanted to show you the problem. So every mother that's enrolled in this intervention, a part of problem management plus is you pick a problem that's really important to you that you want to work on with your counselor. And so 3 moms out of the 24, sleep was their problem that they identified as wanting to focus on, right? So it's very salient. And you can see some of the other things that they wanted to focus on here. But it is, like, right, like, it's there. It's something that they care about. I want to show you what some of the passive sensing looks like because it seems probably, like, confusing. But so activity, you can look at how often she's moving in an hour time frame, right? So if she took some steps or not, and then you can look at that pattern over the day. You can look at how far away she is from her infant. So I forgot to say, we put this Bluetooth beacon on her infant so we can always look at how close they are together. And so you can see when she's close with her baby, when she's spending time with her baby, and when she's far away from her baby. And then we also can look at her geolocation. We tried to integrate sleep. And I'm going to tell you about why we couldn't do it, but it was one of the sensors that could not be implemented. But what we did do is give all the moms the PSQI index that we developed originally in that original qualitative work. And we measured that when she was enrolled, before she was treated for her depression, and after she was treated for her depression. Again, it's just with 24 moms. But you can see generally women that sort of met criteria as having sleep disturbance of a PSQI score over 5, that sort of went down, it dropped. And so not, I can't say anything about significance, but we see it trending in a direction that we would like it to trend. We also see some moms, you can see I wanted to show you every mom in the study that actually got worse. And so again, what are ways that we can think about better addressing the sleep quality distress. Okay, why did sleep sensing not work? The watches, so a lot of it is financial, right? So some of the more like high quality, rigorous ways that we can measure sleep um, are just way too expensive and are like infeasible for us to do in rural Nepal, where there's really limited electricity, and just we don't have, NIH doesn't give you that much money. But other things that happened were the watches had to be charged every few hours. So when you're asking it to track all of that, they have to be charged a lot. So we had to give power banks to the moms, but then the moms and the families had to remember to charge their stuff, which was like not a common practice for them. They didn't like wearing the watch with the baby because they didn't want to hurt the baby. They didn't want to scratch the baby. If they're always carrying and breastfeeding their baby, it was just something that they didn't like. There were a ton of connection issues with the cell data, with Wi-Fi when Wi-Fi existed, or the Bluetooth data. So just like the quality of the data itself was really hard. These devices are a social signal of wealth. And so a part of what we do with that is a lot of community sensitization and community engagement. But there was still a lot of fear of, what if I break the watch? What if I break the phone? What if like husbands wanted to take the watches to go to work with them? So again, there's just like so many social dynamics that you can see that make it really, really hard to measure this kind of stuff. So we weren't able to get any sort of like passive sensing sleep measurements, but we were able to feasibly and acceptably use a bunch of the other measurements. We still want to measure sleep. We still haven't figured out how to do it. So if anyone here wants to contribute to that, that doesn't require $2,000 devices, please let me know. Or if you have money to do that, also let me know. But yeah, that's it. That's all I have for you. So I'll stop now and see if anyone has questions.
I don't see any questions. Well, thank you so much, Ashley, for this very interesting and very fascinating, well-summarized presentation of your excellent research, including your explanation of Nepali culture data and then your wonderful work there. Really appreciate your work and sharing it with us.